the whole idea of this Digi project 2 years ago, it came quite surprisingly to the institute and for me as well. It was Gouriza as an archaeological site in Western Greece. It was chosen as a pilot project, maybe because it was quite compact, small, and quite conveniently it was just published. Actually, the basic scientific publication came out a year ago in series of Finnish Institute. So, and I first give you my first sort of ideas how I approached the whole idea of this putting the archaeological site to open data or digitalized format. My initial idea was that great, this is an amazing opportunity to let's say publish more of the finds and items. Like scientific publication is always a great compromise. You only include a handful of finds and you draw your conclusions. So one idea was that we can add more and more finds. Ideally, we could publish everything, each and every shirt and iron nail or whatever. But of course, it's impossible. It doesn't make sense. But that's sort of one possibility. The second idea was that of course we could publish better those items and those finds that we already did in scientific publication in this paper format. So there's a lot of archaeological finds which really benefit from the better publications, different angles, color photos, maybe 3D models, all those kind of things. After all, I think we accomplished both. In the case of Gouriza, we added more finds, unpublished finds, and we certainly gave different illustrations. We included drawings, photos that gave different angles from the finds. And then, of course, we included the basic file of metadata. And in my mind, I thought that it's all accomplished. That it's in the bag now. We gave the presentation, and I thought that there will be someone IT specialist who will transport this data package to the platform, some web page or whatever. But of course that never happened. There was a lot of difficulties, money first of all, and only after several months later, Manna and Harry informed me about this Archie's digital platform, and we decided to go for it. That this could be a good solution for us, and so, and I think we started early this spring. It was say I think March or what. Pretty soon it was anyway. It was sort of a lockdown situation already that we mostly discussed here via computers, and in a way, of course, Harry gave me in the very beginning. I think Harry pushed me to the deep end of the pool. He gave me the instructions and web page logins to Archies, and I said, go for it. Just try see what you can do, and and of course I thought that, yep, I can do it. Give me a day or two, and I will fix it. I'll put it in the system, and it will be there. But actually, after a couple of weeks, I realized I raised my both hands, and it was quite clear that I can't do it. It's the system is well, maybe the IT skills, which I think I have pretty basic, okay IT skills, they were not enough for this approach. So I contacted Harry, and then we decided to make it together. He gave me a sort of hand in hand guidance, and we went through the different aspects of the system, and finally I realized that all the possibilities and opportunities that the platform indeed has, and I think we managed to do it. I would say that Harry did most of the job. My role, I sort of took the role of sort of a supervisor or consultant. I provided sort of interpretation of data to Harry, but it was in a sort of nutshell. I think my conclusion is that there must be someone with more advanced IT skills. We just can't take any scholar or academic and expect that he can really put his studies in the platform. That we need more than that, and that's a sort of lesson I sort of learned.
Archies and archaeological data, a test case. So now that Tommy has already discussed the project, I don't need to discuss that further, but I only sort of described the project looked very promising because it for this kind of sort of test case, because it had a sort of limited amount of data. It wasn't sort of that big, and the data consisted of photographic images, find documentation, one plan, and this was all a sort of relatively small data set with relatively little metadata. So I thought that, okay, this is a good test case because it's easy to manage, and you can do things manually if you want, but you do have data, so you can actually try to automate some processes, and you have different types of data, so you can sort of figure out how to link things together. Archies looked at first when we found it, or actually I think Laura, who was member of the project from the beginning and is currently also a member, but was elsewhere at the point. I think Laura perhaps found this already in late 2018 in its first stages, but then I didn't have time to look at it much before early last spring. But Archies seems to be sort of what I would call a semantically enabled data store that sort of has been developed obviously with the aim of creating a strong support for SIDOC CRM and the derived ontologies. They are not installed by default, but it is very, very easy to install. There are sort of you just have to sort of just add one sort of package, or I can't remember how it was called, but you can get the whole sort of CRM support for archaeological excavation data into the Archies system. And it seemed to have support for storage of digital objects, and it also came to support sort of maps and plans, georeferenced geographical data that could be served alongside the data. So this looked all very promising. the Sidoxierem is an ontology that has been sort of developed in order to document and describe various objects and the relations between them. This is very good for archaeological documentation, because archaeological fieldwork produces many different types of what they call many different types of data, and you need to be able to link these various types of data together. I mean, you have photographic images, you have trench documentation, you have excavation diaries, you have perhaps sort of various types of geomagnetical measurements, you have soil samples, you have total station measurements, whatever. And all these, it would be very good if you have a documentation system where you can sort of link all this data together. And ArcGIS seems to fill a lot of these things. It has support for GIS data, and Sidoxierem offers a scheme according to which you can sort of create the documentation model for your projects. The Sidoxierem model itself is based on events. So information is usually connected with the, well, you have sort of, everything is sort of, or can be recorded with sort of time information. I mean, for example, during an excavation, everything takes place in time and place. I mean, you have everything is discovered at some point. Finds are found at some point. Documentation is created at some point. People become members of the project at some point and leave. And this sort of means that you could actually document the whole excavation process using Sidoxierem rather well. Because you can create and you can document the events that actually create and affect the data. For example, in this textual description, I sort of quickly describe the underlined things are the kind of things that you could actually describe in the using the Sidoxierem. I mean, you have okay, there should be some, okay, yeah, italics, but something is missing. But this is not really sort of really important, except for the point that the ArcGIS actually seems to offer a tool that you can actually use to describe this kind of thing. I mean, you can have sort of finds, and you can have pots which are sort of a type of find, and you can sort of describe the event of when it was found at a certain time at a certain location, and then this whole thing belongs to a certain sort of work unit at the excavation and everything. You can sort of document this kind of thing, so this would actually work rather well for documenting the whole excavation. But in this case, the data was not documenting the whole excavation. We only had the end results, so the data set was sort of going to be much, much simpler. So the work process for data import into the ArcGIS was to sort of identify the data fields in the data, then create respective resource models to reflect each of the data types. I mean, I'll show you the ArcGIS soon after. We have resource models describing the finds and the images and not really much more. And then you need to create a mapping file that you can use to import your data from, for example, your sort of spreadsheet directly to ArcGIS, and then you can upload the data to ArcGIS using these mapping files. This was the work process for data, and then we had the work process for plans. The plans was a bit special case because ArcGIS sort of supports displaying plans, but it doesn't actually support them by sort of managing the georeference plans by itself. It requires a sort of external map server. In this case, which is also recommended by the ArcGIS documentation, GeoServer is rather easy to install, so it was actually configured and installed on the same server, and the excavation plans were sort of uploaded to GeoServer, and that was used to serve the plans to ArcGIS. And this required a bit of sort of configuration within ArcGIS so that you can actually sort of, so it knew where to look for the plans and how to present them. I'll get straight to the point of what did not please me that much in the process. I figured out that, I mean, for example, where we were documenting photos, and the photos have sort of the person who has taken the photograph, who sort of owns the intellectual property rights to the photograph, and it's sort of very important to keep this information in the database, which is of course you create a data type called person, and then you document the person there, and then you have your external data file where you have the photographs and the information about the photographs, and then you have the photographic. This photographic documentation has the photographer's name, so you just have, and this is a bit complicated, you have to find the the person's internal ID from the database, which is a longish series of numbers and letters, and you have to sort of also add that to your data spreadsheet so that the photographer can be recognized in the database. But this works well when you figure out how to do it, so you can get the photographs into the database, which means that when you open the photograph, you see the photographer's name, and it's actually something that you can sort of click, and then it goes to the photographer data record. The problem was that I couldn't get the photographer data record to show the photographs. That would have required sort of another, I would have had to record the same information also for the photographers, which was a bit sort of stupid because it already was in the database, but it only pointed to the other direction. Of course, I could go to the search view and filter all photographs by the photographer, but that's not quite the same thing as being able to sort of look at the person and see what that person has been used for in the dataset. And this led me to look a bit closer into how the data was stored by ArcGIS. And it sort of, I'm not 100% sure about this. This was only one of the 3 pilot projects I was responsible for during, and I really couldn't spend as much time with this as I would have wanted. But it seems to me that the underlying data storage is not really perhaps that efficient for storing this kind of sort of graph data. I mean, this is the Sidoxerem way of doing things creates sort of data nodes and links between them, and this is sort of something that would work rather well in a triple store. It's very close to RDF data, but it seems to me that in this case ArcGIS is actually not using a triple store or anything similar in the background, so the data search properties seemed a bit limited, especially since I rather soon realized that if you want to use Sidoxerem for any advanced work, it sort of creates sort of chains of data nodes and properties. You have one data node which is connected to another one, which is connected to another one, which is connected to another one, and you would really want to be able to deal with your data so that you can actually sort of search and filter based on this kind of sort of property chains and data chains. And this is not something I could figure out how to do currently in the Arches. So this was sort of a bit of, okay, this is because yeah, I think it's time to move to the summary, because I think that the user interface, and especially what you can do in relation to the SIDOC CRM, is actually rather impressive. I haven't found a way to create as easily and sort of clearly SIDOC CRM sort of well data that is actually sort of where we can sort of do the things that SIDOC CRM seems to be meant for. And then of course and then I'd say that this map or sort of plan interface is really unsuitable for small scale field plans. The kind of things that you actually have when you have a sort of, when you're doing a sort of archaeological excavation. If you do a survey, it's perfect. But if you do field work, already starting from the point that Arches only supports one single map projection type, which is sort of a latitude-longitude projection, which is very good for large-scale plans if you want to show sort of plans on the scale of a country or a continent or whatever. But when you go to the level of an excavation, you would really need to be able to show the local data in some kind of sort of rectangular coordinate system, which perhaps is based on the use of meter. So you can actually sort of, from the coordinates, you can sort of, yeah, at least you would need to be able to sort of get some kind of sort of universal transfer Mercator system or something like that. And the best case would be that you could actually have your sort of local coordinate system somehow used in a sort of a particular area. Also, Arches does not seem to offer solutions for sort of robust data storage, in the sense that you really have to take care of your files somewhere else. You can sort of upload them using Arches, but then you anyway have to sort of have some kind of external file storage, which sort of takes care that when your server goes down or a computer crashes, the files are not gone. I mean, it doesn't really keep them secure, nor does it actually sort of name the files in any way. So if you are wanting to have some kind of sort of decent sort of digital identifiers for your objects, you have to take care of that by yourself. So the digital object storage has to be somewhere else anyway. The data import works well and is useful once you get the knack of it, how to configure, how to sort of modify your sort of spreadsheet files so that you can actually link stuff together and everything. And it sort of does require some manual work, but it seems to work quite well. But it sort of requires quite much sort of planning, because you sort of have to start from the resource models and the database and everything. But what is really bad is the data export. You can't really get the data out of Arches. Not in any way that I could sort of easily find. Perhaps if you access the database server running behind it sort of directly, you might be able to export data from there. But I mean, this is really sad, because I mean, this is a wonderful tool for you to sort of actually to create something using the SIDOC CRM schemes. But then when you can't get the data out of the system, and you can't use it in any kind of sort of graph database or triple store, which really could sort of take care of, or which you could really use to sort of analyze this kind of sort of the complex graphs that are actually formed with a sort of fully developed CRM scheme. But you can't do it because you can't really get the data out. You sort of have visualization systems within Arches, but that doesn't really seem to, well, that could work better than I have actually managed to do it, because but still, if you can't get data out of your system in any kind of standard form, it's really not good for anything else than as the end point of the data. So my sort of conclusion or a summary regarding the using of arches in archaeology, that it's suitable for visual representations for geographically contextualized data. And it's sort of, I mean, the user interface is sort of good, and it has lots of the necessary ingredients for use at an archaeological excavation level, but it's not quite there yet. And I guess the main problems are the lack of the possibility to use a local coordinate system and the lacking of any decent kind of data export from the system. Thank you. Now I can actually, if you want, I can show you the Arches site that we created. I can take questions also at this point if you want. I'll switch the display. Now, this is the, okay, let's go. Here's the, well, this is actually the sort of almost, let's go here. So this is the front page. I haven't done anything with the standard front page because I had lots of other things to do, but we can go to search. Let's see, it opens. The database is not open for public because the photographs are, the photograph rights, I think there's some problem with it. So you need to have an account which I have actually accepted for you to be able to sort of get really, I mean, to actually see the data. But I think you can sort of use the search stuff on everything if you just sort of go there. But this is the Gouriza site. The blue points, they come from an overlay plan, which is the finds. I also have a plan which sort of describes the site. This is sort of the limits of the site area, not quite correctly drawn. This sort of use of overlay maps was actually is actually something which is really nice feature, because you can import your sort of vector GIS data and you can sort of show it, you can sort of put different overlays which you can sort of turn on and off. For example, the find overlay was created from the finds data, and the site was sort of drawn just here within the Arches program. Then you can have different base maps. The outdoors is sort of nice in this case. It loads the data from some external data source. I can't remember which, but it's sort of, you can sort of see the relation of the excavation site in relation to the sort of geography around the site. This is very handy for looters. Sorry. And then I actually did, this is the only plan from the excavation that I was actually georeference. So this is it's a raster-based plan, so it has to be used as a base map then, because in this case it's served by the GeoServer server, which is placed on the same server instance. So Tommy can perhaps sort of describe what is actually here in this plan.
Yeah, right. Those lines they sort of describe the underground structures of pottery kiln, ceramic kiln, sort of combustion chambers or firing chambers, if you like. They are something like 7.4 meters long, 1 meter broad, both of these structures, and a lot of archaeological finds were found inside those underground structures, and they are, yeah, you can see the blue dots. They represent those finds. Please continue,
yeah.
Harry.
Yeah, and for example, now here we can sort of, since I have the finds overlay on, it's the blue dots. If I turn it off, the blue dots disappear. I can sort of go zoom, okay, but I can't zoom closer. This is also something that is a bit problematic for excavation data, because you have sort of some limits how close you can zoom in arches, and I've been trying to set the maximum zoom factor larger, but it still doesn't seem to want to go any closer. Okay, here we can click this one. Okay, it shows that it's the find name KS21 resource model find, and this is the idea. Here we can have a report. So here we have a plan, same kind of plan. We could actually here have the same base maps and overlays, and then we have to find information. This is the find category, name. This is the location it was found. This is from the this comes originally from the find documentation, but the problem was that it wasn't in this latitude longitude coordinate system. It was in the local universal transfer Mercator system. So I actually had to sort of transform the coordinates to another coordinate system before I could actually import the data. This is also something that is a bit problematic if you want to use it for data. And here is the project name. This is the sort of recovered in project. All these are sort of created using the CRM scheme, which I can, for example, show. I'll show it here. This is the resource, here, resource models. This is the resource models we have for this data set. Yes, so this is a find. Find is a man-made object, E22 in the CRM terminology. It has 4 properties. The project, in this case, this sort of archaeological excavation project, it was sort of recovered in then the sort of location where it was found. CRM has these sort of shortcuts, because actually you would need to sort of, if you do it sort of really sort of according to the, well, I mean, the best practices would be to sort of document the finding of this item as a sort of, as an event. And the event has a date, so that event would connect this find to a certain location and to a certain date. But you have this sort of shortcut that you can use to sort of indicate that this find has a former or current location. So this is the former location where it was sort of recovered. And there you have, for example, the data type. In this case, it's a GeoJSON feature collection, meaning that you can actually have sort of dots, lines, geographical polygons that sort of describe the spatial context. Then I have the find category, which is just sort of using the generic class of type, E55 type, and it sort of uses concepts that come from a concept collection, which is sort of a defined vocabulary, which was created from during the data import process. And then we have to find name, which is used also to sort of name this item in the search field. And the search field is here. For example, we can limit can only sort of look, for example, in this case, the images. Now here we have the images, and then you have the filters that you can use. This is it would be nicer if it, in this case, limited the possible facets to only the data types that were actually chosen to search. But for example, here we can, for image, I mean, we have much more information. We have, for example, object type equals searching. Like this. So then we should have this. And now that, okay, now the images are not shown on the maps because they don't have any coordinate information. So then we can pick this open. We can see the actual, here's the image name, here is the image file, and you can click it and see it as a larger one, even larger. And then you have to find context, find category, owner of the photograph, object type, illustration type, and the year it was taken. It could have a date also, but the data also only included years. And this. Do you have questions? I think I'm sort of shown all that comes to my mind now. And, I mean, as you can see, it is quite handy for displaying data. But for example, in the map view of the area, I mean, it's a bit sort of, it would be nice to have some kind of, for example, coordinate display, or perhaps a grid might be able, there may be a way to create a grid on the top of this, but I'm not sure about it. But it has possibilities, and it would be very good, for example, for survey data. If you sort of walk out, I mean, sort of, if you imagine that you were sort of making a survey of this area, so you can sort of mark the sites where you have found something and which have interesting locations. Then you could sort of do. It would be sort of very useful at this level.
I have a very practical question here. So it's more or less related to kind of a administrative side of this. Do you think that because how I understand now is that you've been doing together, so you have been consulting each other when you've been putting in the data there. Would you, Harri, think yourself that there is a person who is more or less doing this from the technical point of view, or in a practice not only point of view, but at the running the technicalities, could do this independently on a quite close consultation and cooperation with the archaeologists themselves? And how much did you know the material in advance, or the type of material? So I'm just asking for someone for the future projects, how to plan them. So how would it work if, for instance, the data is so old that there is not necessarily the first-hand knowledge of it by the archaeologists themselves for the technical personnel and so on and so forth?
I'd say that for the person who creates, for example, the resource models in the arches, has to know the Sidox quite well. And to be able to work with that one quite well, you really have to understand about the data. So it's not really, you need to have someone who actually knows something about archaeology.
In your opinion, doesn't necessarily need to be the first-hand person knowing exactly that material that you are putting in. That's what I mean. It's just knowing the type that to ask the right questions, more or less. Or okay.
Yeah, I think that's sort of. I had nothing to do with the Gouriza excavations ever. I've never been to. No, I've been to Athens once for 2 days. I have no experience with Greek archaeology. I have experience in Roman archaeology, but I was sort of able to sort of understand how the data what is archaeological data.
Yeah.
And that is quite enough for this one. But you don't actually have to know the particular data that well.
Yeah, but it doesn't hurt if you have someone like Tommy there.
No. And also, then again, you don't necessarily, for example, if you want to use this for something, you don't really have to, the person who actually creates the resource models doesn't actually have to know much about IT, but you need to have someone who is able to set up the server and perhaps the map server running behind and do that kind of things, because that's something that it takes a bit understanding of how web servers work and how you configure things. And also, now that this server has been running for several months, I've noticed that you really have to restart everything occasionally, because every time I come back to the Arches installation after a while, I find out that the search engine that is used for searching data has mysteriously closed down in the background, and I can't find any reason why. So it's something that I really have to reboot the server occasionally.
Okay, thank you.
But you have to have someone who knows about IT to keep the whole thing running. Otherwise, it just requires that the archaeologist who creates the data model is willing and interested in Sidox, because it will take a while to figure out how things actually work. And you don't. Okay, I hope I'm. But it would be nice to hear I'm wrong, but I haven't really found any good examples of how things are actually documented using Sidox.
I could pop in on that one.
Yeah.
When you have a project like this where you have an actual tool where you can work with semantics directly, then you have, as you say, somebody needs to understand servers, somebody needs to understand conceptual modeling, and somebody needs to understand the data, and you have to bring all that together. So that's what makes it a bit complex. So one thing that really comes to mind is that you in this project you had to build the models from scratch and do the analysis and work together to have the models, and so there are various efforts going on from various directions. There's from within the Getty, there's a group that I'm part of called the Art Resources Modeling Working Group, which is supposed to create some basic models so that if you're dealing with some basic stuff, then you could just load them and then expand or extend them. And then there's linked art, which is, okay, I'm a part of all the groups, so I won't mention that. There's linked art, which is a group that's doing patterns for all things related to art, museums, and then there's another group in Switzerland called the Swiss Art Research Infrastructure, is also doing patterns. But the basic idea is no group is specifically focused on archaeology, but one sort of, intellectual effort that could eventually come about would be that, some project takes as part of its focus building these standard semantic models for, you have a find, you have a trench or whatever, and of course these things change somewhat according to projects, but at least you don't start from zero and say, okay, what is CDOC theorem? How does it work? How do I then apply it in ArchIS? You have something there, and then you pair it, if it's close enough, then you apply it. If you need to modify it, you modify it, but at least you don't have to go from zero to semantic hero before you can do anything, which can really block a project.
There was in the late 90s, I think there was some kind of sort of movement when the sort of digital databases came at first. There was sort of some kind of sort of work done in order to create some kind of sort of basic common data model for archaeology that could have been used in relational databases, I think. At some point, there was a sort of some journal that ran for something like perhaps 20 numbers or something, which sort of work was, but I can't remember it. I just worked at a project where this sort of the documentation guy was sort of involved in this work at some point. I can't remember, but it's something that has been tried in a way before, but using different kind of tools and different kind of sort of.
Yeah, there's a huge danger because you can try to force everybody into the same corral, and it doesn't apply. But the sort of strategy here is to say, there are common things people talk about, and CDOC theorem more provides a language for structuring data. So the thing is to not have to, because most people come at this and they aren't conceptual modelers, they're researchers who want to actually work with their data. They have to make this jump from, I didn't know anything about this, to now I have to learn this new modeling language and do something with it. So the more you can shortcut that and just give people
and I guess this sort of, the ArchIS looks like a sort of very, very good tool for example, for learning CDOC theorem, because you can actually sort of do things, and it's easy to create stuff and delete stuff, and sort of it sort of tries to sort of, it has obviously the ability to, for example, to limit the properties that you can use for a certain item, and so it forces you to sort of work according to the CDOC theorem scheme, which is really good, because it's something I haven't seen before, and this is something I'm sort of really, really impressed about this system. And then as a sort of learning tool for CDOC theorem, I think it's wonderful.
Please, Laura.
Yes, hi. I have a question concerning the final products. How user-friendly would you say that ArchIS is for other researchers? Let's say someone's studying Greek pottery production and going through sites with kilns and stuff like that, and then comes into contact with this Gouriza site ArchIS. Do you think that it would be provide information, and is it easy enough to use? I tried to find some stuff over there. I'm not fully convinced yet. But how would you say, and especially not just Harri, but also Tommi, I would like to ask you what is your feeling after regarding this?
Well, personally, I would say that what we really accomplished here, what Harry really presented here is quite far away from the idea that I had initially. What we can do, what the digital publication really is, and what we can do, but yeah. Harry, you can please give your impression.
Well, for me, it's really hard to say because I understand how the thing works in a way. So for me, but I can, for example, see the searching tools, for example, look sort of nice and intuitive, but they perhaps are not quite that. I was sort of trying to find, for example, here sort of things that I think should be there, and it's sort of a bit difficult to find them because you have to sort of figure out that, yeah. And then, of course, as a researcher, because I can't, I mean, if I find here a sort of set of sort of kiln supports, which I actually can find here, I don't know how to, I mean, I can't do anything with the data. I can sort of, perhaps sort of show it on the plan, but I can't sort of export the list. I can sort of individually, I can open each of the finds, so I can sort of make my own documentation from each, but it's still sort of mostly for sort of display purposes. It may be that if you sort of did enough work, you could sort of create some kind of sort of it is possible actually to export search results, so you can sort of get something out of the data. Find CSV, see what it actually opens. Sorry, this is something I've missed. But it's not really, well, I'm not sure. It sort of depends what you want to do.
Yeah, so work in progress still, but hopefully someday this will be a useful tool. Thank you very much, Harry and Tommi.
Yeah.
We're over time. I just wanted to chime in on that there's it is constantly under development, and there's also like a bit of a trouble in finding all the documentation. So for example, you can, within the system itself, fields that you want to be exportable, there's a thing that you tick, and then it's available as a CSS export, so you can return results just as a plain user, and then CSV, sorry, not CSS. And you can drop data out of returned results into CSV. And there is also, I don't actually know the technical details, but you can take all the JSON data and dump it out in such a way that you can make it available in RDF and create it in a triple store. I mean, that's what they do at the Getty. So it's a matter of finding out the documentation.
Yeah. Okay. So it's that's
just a minor point since you mentioned it. The reverse link issue on photos and that sort of thing. In 5.1, that's finally solved because it's a thing. So in 5.1, if you've made a forward link from one object, then on the other objects, you don't have to create it'll automatically pick up that there was a forward link and display the fact that I'm connected to the other object.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I mean, this has sort of lots of potential, this system, and I guess at some point, possibly even rather close in the future, because it seems to see quite active development at the moment. I think this actually might be sort of really good. But currently, I mean, sort of the experiences we had in this pilot sort of last spring and summer, it's not quite there yet, but it's sort of really, really promising thing.